Born in London but growing up in Sheffield, Bill was educated at Stonyhurst College in Lancashire before reading history at Oxford. He qualified as a solicitor in 1967, but a political career beckoned, and the rest is history. Sir Bill, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Mark, nice
Great
to
to have
see
you on the programme, sir.
Very good to see you.
Let's deal with an immediate political issue.
Yeah.
Is a Brexit breakthrough in the offing?
Well, I don't really think it is, actually, and I'll tell you why. First of all, there is no text at all. So there's zero paper to look at. Nobody really knows what the ingredients, what the details are. That's number one. And the second thing is that the issues are so huge that the idea that I'm reading on some of the WhatsApps that somehow or other people could be bounced into an agreement on Tuesday is absolutely ludicrous, because if that was to be attempted, that would set up a whole chain of reactions which would not be helpful. We obviously want to have a solution to the problems of Northern Ireland. We had the Troubles. There has been civil disorder. Stability is absolutely essential. The Good Friday Agreement is essential. To put all this at risk by trying to rush it without any documentation so that nobody can actually see what's been happening. I mean, I've been talking to some of the DUP people over the last couple of days, and they did have a meeting, but as far as I'm aware, they haven't seen any texts. And it's the written word that really matters as well as the objectives. And you can't trust the EU. I mean, let's be frank about it.
Yeah.
I've come to this conclusion, having been, as you said, on the European Committee since 1985.
Well, during the pandemic, the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen briefly threatened to erect a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland over the vaccine rollout.
Absolutely.
Even though they'd obfuscated about getting a deal because of not having a border.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and
abject hypocrisy.
And what was amazing was the fact that they actually imposed a prohibition on exports of those vaccines
Illegal.
to the UK. Well, I mean, it was done under so-called Article 16. They had to come back off it. They had to cancel it within 2 days. But the objective was to prevent the AstraZeneca vaccines and others from coming over to the UK.
And they were going to tear up contracts.
I know,
so
absolutely shocking.
Behaving like like cowboy builders.
Well, absolutely right.
However, we do need this resolved. And as I said in my big opinion, I don't think it does the Brexit cause any favours to have another decade of wrangling over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Our viewers, my viewers and listeners in Northern Ireland are suffering. They don't have government, as you know. I know that's a big priority for you.
Yeah.
What about some compromise? So, for example, green and red lanes, which means that any goods intended for sale only in Northern Ireland go through a green lane, minimal or no checks at all. And also, the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, only enters a dispute if referred to by the Northern Ireland courts. That sounds like a deal to me.
Well, it looks like a deal to those people who don't necessarily know how these things work in practice. The bottom line is, without the detail about these green and red lanes, and we haven't seen the text, as I've said, I wouldn't put any money on being certain that that would work in the first place. The second thing is that regarding the European Court and regarding the number of EU laws that have been made behind closed doors by majority vote by the Council of Ministers in Europe without any involvement whatsoever from anybody, either from the UK or indeed from Northern Ireland, is an absolutely massive democratic deficit, as we call it. Yeah. It's a massive democratic vacuum. Imagine, we've got 2 million people in Northern Ireland. Imagine if you take, for example, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool put together, that's 2 million people. Imagine if they all had laws passed over their heads by this system behind closed doors by majority vote, and they weren't involved in it whatsoever. This is a massive problem, and it can't be resolved just by the waving of some magic wand and saying, oh, well, there's some means of trying to ensure that the Court of Justice is somehow not going to be involved. All the evidence is that the way in which the EU always ultimately makes its mind up is that they will stick by the European Court of Justice as being the key factor in the decisions that are taken.
Now, you've never been the most effusive supporter of the Prime Minister. I mean, he has your support because you're a loyal guy, but you're not a cheerleader for Rishi Sunak. I don't think you backed his candidacy in the leadership election. But he's a smart cookie. And clearly he has an eye for detail. And he's got a political antenna, hasn't he? He's not naive enough to present a deal to the Eurosceptic Tory backbenchers, or indeed the DUP, that won't wash with them. He's got something, surely.
Well, that's a good guess, but actually I wouldn't bank on it, because the reality is that I've said these things are very, very deeply rooted. I mean, people actually fought and died over the question of whether or not we'd have a free democracy. We were conned into going into the European Union in the first place. It was then the European Community. I wrote a piece the other day and I pointed out that Con O'Neill, who was the negotiator for this, actually says in his own report to the then Foreign Secretary that he didn't grasp the legal framework of the European system. I mean, it was beyond imagination. So those people who are saying that we ought to go back in again, or that there's some other kind of deal that could be put on the table, must understand that this is a completely different arrangement to what we have in our country. We have MPs who decide on behalf of the electorate, be they Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, whatever they are. They go into the ballot box, they go into the ballot room, they put in their vote, and then those decisions are taken by the majority in a given constituency. Those people are then in Parliament making the laws of this country. In the European Union, it's absolutely the other way around. It's made behind closed doors by majority vote. And the laws that have been made, my committee have calculated that there's something of the order of 450 of these laws that have been passed since Brexit in relation to Northern Ireland over the heads of these people. Well, you can imagine that they really are fed sick and tired and very angry about this, because they've had no say in it whatsoever. And unless they come up with a way of being able to ensure that they are actually involved, then this democratic vacuum continues.
Let's go back to the beginning, Sir Bill.
Okay.
Did your childhood and your early life shape your politics?
Well, I think it did. I was brought up, in fact, I was born on the day at the very time when Hitler invaded France, on the 10th of May 1940. Churchill became Prime Minister that day by some extraordinary coincidence, as you might say. But actually,
two important events that day.
But it was. My mother must have been reeling. My father was a lieutenant doing his artillery training. Yeah. And basically, I mean, the fact is that the whole of his career, he was killed in the war, got the military cross, duty, principle, fighting for your country, that sort of thing. I was brought up along those lines. And when I went to school, I had a similar kind of background. We had 7 VCs at my school. I had quite a small school of 300 people. We were taught very much self-discipline, duty, patriotism, and to do the right thing. So for practical purposes, I think that had quite a big impact. And then I did history, read history at Oxford. I then went into constitutional law, so I learned a lot about what I call
useful recently.
Well, it has, because it meant that I was doing this work. I mean, I was advising Quebec, for example, in relation to the Canadian Constitution and all that sort of thing.
And you went across the Maastricht Treaty,
yeah, I did all that.
Which you found wanting.
All that. So I'd learned a lot while I was growing up. And then when I went into Parliament in 1984, I had an advantage in one sense, which was, without overdoing it, that I did understand how the mechanics of these things worked and what needed to be done if you wanted to oppose provisions and so on. Then they made the most astonishing, I think, in retrospect, and I think they think in retrospect, a terrible mistake. In 1985, they put me on the European Select Committee. And then I saw the whole thing completely clearly, because I saw all the detail. And by 1986, Margaret's still in power, and I put down the Sovereignty Amendment. And do you know something, Mark? They wouldn't even allow me to debate it. And I got up and remonstrated twice, and I was told to sit down. And of course, now that wouldn't happen because of what we've done since. Yeah. So to cut a long story short, after that, Margaret was assassinated, and then it was over Europe, of course. Yeah. And then after that, Maastricht Rebellion, because the creation of European government was what the Maastricht Treaty was all about. Yeah. So that was the beginning, and then Nice, Amsterdam, Lisbon, then the referendum campaigns, and every single one of these was all associated. We set up a Maastricht referendum campaign in a place called Great College Street in Westminster, where we put all the briefs together, and every day we'd go in with these piles of briefs, and of course the whips would look, oh my God, fathers, not again. And the reality was that they couldn't answer the questions.
Yeah.
So
Eurosceptic rebels were nicknamed, allegedly nicknamed the Bastards,
yes,
by John Major at the time.
Yes, I'm sure it's true.
And
I'm sure it's true. So
there you go. You're a lawyer. We'll tread carefully. And I think that David Cameron might have referred to the ERG as swivel-eyed loons or something of that.
Or something
flavour.
of that kind. It doesn't
something
really matter.
disparaging.
Yes.
So Eurosceptics were previously judged to be an obscure minority, sort of just left-field nutters, except that the referendum happened and you won.
Well, can I tell you why we got the referendum? It was because I observed that actually, having been turned down in debating the sovereignty question, which is about who governs this country, it's about the democratic question, that the collusion between the two front benches meant that they'd stay in the European Union at any price. The only way around it was to get Parliament to abdicate its decision-making process, hand it over to the people, and that's why I set up the Maastricht referendum campaign, to bypass Parliament and get Parliament to agree to do it. And that's what David Cameron, after a huge number of attempts to get a referendum bill, Margaret Thatcher's last act in the House of Commons, as I recall, was to vote for a referendum on Maastricht. So for practical purposes, we created a step-by-step approach, and that created a sense that this was serious and had to be dealt with. And we got the referendum bill through in 2015, and I always believed we would win it. Because you know the one thing that's most important about British politics? The British people's common sense, the British people's sense of identity, the British people's understanding of democracy. I believe in it, and they really understand it. So they don't take too much notice of a lot of the opinion polls and things. They do the thing that they believe is the right thing to do. And that is how we got it through.
And your emotions, when you, I mean, you won't have woken up to the news. You'll have been at a count somewhere.
No,
but when you
on the referendum.
You got the news, yeah. When we left the European Union.
Actually, the referendum. I woke up at about 2:30 in the morning, and I heard the result in Sunderland. I'd gone to bed earlier because I thought we were going to win. I wasn't complacent because I was actually going to do some...
Nigel half conceded, didn't he, at 1 a.m.?
Well, that's true. But I had actually been asked to go on various television programmes later in the morning, so I wanted to get some sleep before that. Yeah. So I did, and I woke up and heard the result in Sunderland. And I went back to sleep again because I could see if we won in Sunderland...
Your emotions then, the next day, the days after that, your emotions, having campaigned for this for decades.
Yeah.
Tell me what went through your mind, how you felt.
Sigh of relief. You have no idea.
Why relief? Why is that?
Relief because I believe that it was absolutely essential to maintain the right of the British people to govern themselves by their own elected MPs and not have these laws imposed on them.
And Bill, some people think that Brexit's a bit of a botched job, including the Northern Ireland Protocol, etc. I know it's not perfect, but is it still better than Remain?
It's absolutely 100% better, but it's not only that. The real reason why there are uncertainties and difficulties as we speak is because of COVID, which cost 400 billion, and also the Ukraine war, which pushed up the cost of living.
Inflation,
so people's
supply chains.
Yeah, people's discontent about the cost of living and inflation and all the things that go with that for small businesses and the rest are sort of, as it were, enveloped in a feeling that things aren't going properly. But believe me, we've got the retained EU law bill through, and that gets rid of the EU laws. And I give Rishi Sunak credit for that, because he's put that through.
So, Bill, it's been a Mark Meets special. I could do a Mark Dolan Tonight special with you, frankly, and I know our viewers and listeners would love it as well. Only a few seconds to go.
Yes, of course.
Let me tell you, you're as fit as a fiddle. You've got the energy of a man half your age, but you could be on a beach. Why aren't you?
Oh, because I've got a job to do. And the job is to look after my constituents. And can I pay tribute to my Stone Constituency Association and all the people in my constituency who returned me ever since 1984. Even when Maastricht was on, they gave me a standing ovation in a meeting when I had to explain to them why I was really making trouble for the government, my own government. But the bottom line is, being a backbencher enables you to be able to do things which you can't do if you're a minister. So it's much better to be a backbencher if you want to fight the really big battles on the really big issues.
There you go. I might have a title for your next book, The Backbencher That Changed the World. Sir Bill Cash, a delight to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to see you.
I really look forward to our next encounter.